Do you read books? I'm not talking about excruciatingly long fantasy series like The Wheel of Time or something. I never was able to finish that one. I'm talking about non-fiction educational books. Actually, today I'm going to talk about 7 books and the 7 key insights I got from these books that helped me become a better software developer. But the fun thing is, they're not software development books. When I was a kid, I loved reading books. And that continued until somewhere around my 20s, and then I kind of stopped. I think it has something to do with being really busy building my academic career. At some point I got kids, then I started a bunch of businesses, failed at them, started more businesses, failed again, etc, etc. That was all a lot of fun, but it was also quite stressful, and I felt like I didn't really have the energy to read books and focus my mind on that. I really felt like I was starting to get behind. But a few years ago, I picked up reading again, and it just feels so good. Even if I'm busier than ever, mainly due to this channel, actually. When I'm recording this, we're almost at 100k subscribers. So I don't know, when you're watching this, we might have hit the 100k already or almost. Take a look. If you're not subscribed yet, subscribe and help me reach that goal. If we are at 100k already, then I'm going to throw a 100k live party. Or perhaps this is completely irrelevant to you because you're watching this video 30 years in the future from Mars. Watch that Cohagen guy, by the way.
I don't give you enough information to think!
So as I said, I'm not going to cover development-focused books like Python for Dummies. I should actually read that, to make sure that I'm not missing anything important. You didn't know Python had type hints? What are you, some kind of caveman? But instead I'm going to cover books about human behavior, about running startups, about running businesses. So it's kind of a general life advice video. Some people in my audience seem to think that I'm a boomer, so at my ripe age, I think I have the right to be a bit preachy. I've put links to the books that I'm talking about today in the description of this video. I've put them in a kit, and there are a couple of other books in there that you might find interesting as well. They're affiliate links, so if you buy one of these books through the links, you'll support the channel at no cost to you. Now, let's dive in. The first book that I want to talk about is The Subtle Art of Not Giving a by Mark Manson. By the way, I don't have all these books physically here because I often also like to read on my Kindle. That's another thing that's bothering me. Why is it called a Kindle and not a Kindle? I would say it should be some kind of tomato thing, right? Like that in the US it's called a Kindle and in the UK a Kindle, and that there's like all kinds of internet battles going on. But that's not happening. Everybody's just agreeing to call it a Kindle. What's going on? Anyway, that's what keeps me up at night. Key insight from this book. The book is really about how we approach happiness in our life. We often want to do things because they make us happy, or we give people suggestions to do what makes them happy, and we try to hide negativity. But actually negativity, and in particular failure, is a crucial part of being a human. In fact, failure and learning go together really closely. What he writes in his book is basically, if you want to become better at something, it means you have to fail many times, because failure leads to learning. So it also means that if someone else is better at something than you, they probably failed more often than you. And if somebody's worse, they've probably not had the painful learning experiences that you had. And I think that's a really interesting perspective because it puts it back on you and what you need to do to become better at something. And I noticed this effect myself at the several failed businesses I had in the past. I mean, it sucks if that happens every time. But when you fail, you learn from it. What I noticed is that with every failure, I learned new things. And then the next time I fail, I actually fail at something else. And then I just hope that things converge at some point. And this also happens in the process of becoming a better software developer. If you want to learn about design principles, well, the best way is to just start applying them and see what happens. Or not apply them and then have to spend a day to change a minor thing in the code that should have been really easy, but is actually incredibly hard. So you fail, and then the next time you do a better job. It doesn't mean you shouldn't listen to other people anymore, but it means that if you really truly want to internalize things, you need to put them in practice and embrace failure and learn from failure. You know that feeling you get, that knot in your stomach when you failed at something, when you made a mistake. That's actually a great feeling to have, because it means you're about to learn something really cool, and the next time you're not going to make that mistake again. The next book I want to talk about is The Elephant in the Brain by Kevin Simler and Robin Hanson. As developers, we tend to focus on logic, but actually one of the main points of this book is that the world is run by emotions. People act on emotions and then rationalize things afterwards. And I'm going to come back to this point later on in the video as well. A lot of the things we do are actually not based at all on logic or cooperation. They're based on self-serving intuitions. In the book, they make a distinction between the decision maker, that's the part of your brain that actually makes the decisions, and what they call the press secretary. And the press secretary is an interesting aspect of the brain in that it takes your decisions, which are mostly based on intuitions and emotions and illogical things and self-serving interests, and then transforms them for the outside world to present them in a more favorable way. For example, the real reason you didn't buy that technical gadget is because it's just expensive and you don't have the money. But you rationalize it by saying, well, it has some disadvantages and it doesn't work as well for me, etc., etc. But actually the real reason is something else. What really hit me with this book is that when you think about your identity, who you are as a person, that's not the decision maker, but there's actually research showing that your identity is the press secretary. So you're not taking the decision at all. You're just rationalizing them all the time. I think it's good to realize this. And when you're thinking about software design, when you're trying to take the best design decisions, always think about your real intuitions that are behind these choices, and if they're really in the interest of what you're trying to do. For example, is the reason that you're not switching to a newer library or ecosystem because it's a bad ecosystem, or is it because you're actually afraid of change and afraid to get out of your comfort zone? Okay, next book is Atomic Habits by James Clear. This has lots of valuable tips on how to form habits. And habits are actually really useful because if you form habits, you're kind of building on your internal system to push yourself towards action. And good habits to have as developers, for example, is to write tests for your code. And for that, you need to form the habit of doing this regularly. One of the key insights of the book is to not set goals, but focus on the system instead. And that's good for us as developers because we love systems, right? Most importantly, what James Clear says about habits is that they need to be obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying. So if you want to form a habit, it needs to adhere to those principles. In the testing example, if you want to make writing unit tests obvious, what you can do is attach a time or location to it, like every Wednesday, I spend time writing tests. Or when I work from home, I mainly focus on writing tests. You can also make writing tests more attractive. Give yourself a reward. If I write at least 10 tests today, I can spend some extra time on that side project that I'm so excited about. If you want to make writing tests easier, you could create ready-to-go boilerplate code for your tests and make it harder to not include tests if it's already in the boilerplate. And the final thing is, if you want to make writing tests satisfying, you could do things like keeping a score, like the coverage or the number of lines of test code that you've written to measure your progress. The fourth book I want to talk about is Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. He's a key negotiator in hostage situations, so it's a very interesting read. Negotiation is actually everywhere in life, not just hostage negotiation. And knowing a few negotiation skills is actually going to help you a lot in your career. And one of the key insights, and that's actually closely related to the ideas from The Elephant in the Brain, is that negotiations are irrational and driven by emotions. So if you approach them from a rational, academic, technical perspective, you're not going to get the results that you want. And this is a danger because I noticed myself, at least as a technical person, I have a tendency to really aim for that kind of logical approach to negotiation, and that actually doesn't work so well. Let's say you want to negotiate a better salary for yourself. So here are a few tips from the book. The first one is that you need to give your opponent, or your boss probably in this case, to say no as soon as possible. The reason this is important is that saying no gives your opponent the illusion of control and also triggers reciprocity later on. If they say no lots of times, they'll feel obligated to say yes at some point to you. Another thing you should do is try to bend reality by using anchors. You should name very high numbers or high number rangers and let them go first with a suggestion. For example, you could say something like, a top-level senior engineer makes well over 250k. So what do you think is a reasonable salary to pay me? And well, maybe they say like, well, 50k, but then making the step to say 80k with regards to that 250k you mentioned earlier is actually a pretty minor change. Well, actually going from 50K to 80K is like a huge increase of salary. So anchors are really important because they establish a context. And the fun thing is that the anchors, the numbers don't even have to be about the same thing. So it doesn't have to be a salary number. Even if you say like, hey, there are over 1 million developers working in the US, that number also serves as an anchor for salary negotiations, even though it has nothing to do with the money that you want to have. Another thing you can do is add non-monetary things to the negotiation that are important to you, but less important to them. Like, for example, maybe you want to work from home regularly, or maybe you want a bit more freedom in when you work, or a better job title, or other perks that you like to have. By the way, if you want me to do a dedicated video on salary negotiation, let me know in the comments. Okay, book number 5, and this book I actually didn't read on my Kindle. This is Principles by Ray Dalio. And this is actually a really interesting book. Ray Dalio is also called the Steve Jobs of finance. I'm not entirely sure if that really makes a lot of sense to do a comparison like that. But the idea of the book is that it really gives you a nice framework for living life, for working according to a set of principles that he's been using successfully. And there are a couple of really interesting things in there. Like one thing, and that's also related to failure in the first book that I mentioned, The Subtle Art of Not Giving Up, that whenever a problem surfaces, whenever you feel pain, it means you have an opportunity in front of you to improve. And the more painful the problem is, the more you're probably going to learn from it. So in order to be successful, what Ray says is that you have to, 1, perceive the problems, and 2, not tolerate them. And perceiving problems is actually really important, because if you don't perceive the problems, you can't learn from them, you can't fail. So as a result, it's essential to bring problems to the surface as soon as possible. Another thing he mentioned, and this is something that I've been applying more and more in my life as a software developer and while running a business, and also in this YouTube channel, is that you're going to be way more effective if you focus on diagnosis and design rather than jumping to solutions immediately. So if your code doesn't work, or if there is some design issue in your code, try to understand the problem first before you dive into writing solutions. And if you need a framework for this to help you write software, I've written a design guide. This is available for free at ArjanCodes/design guide. It contains these 7 steps that I take whenever I design a new piece of software. It's PDF files straight to the point that I think is going to help you out a lot. So arjan.codes/design guide. I also put the link in the description of this video. A final thing that I found interesting in this book is Ray's ideas about opinions. He says to not treat all opinions as equally valuable. I mean, almost everybody has an opinion, but many of them are worthless or harmful. In other words, the views of people without a track record are not equal to views of people with strong track records. You should weigh opinions by believability. So if you want to learn fast, find a believable person who disagrees with you and try to understand their reasoning. This is also good to take into account with code reviews. The feedback from a senior developer is going to be more valuable than from an intern. It doesn't mean that the intern can't provide valuable advice. You just need to believability weigh the feedback. Book number 6 that I want to talk about, that's this one, The E-Myth Revisited by Michael Gerber. Why most businesses don't work and what to do about it. One of the key insights I got from this book is that a business is a system, and a system needs to be designed. We know this from software, right? We need to design software, but a business is also a system that you can design, just like software. And when you go into business, when you create a startup, launch your own business, especially if you do this on your own, you're actually 3 people in one. He calls them the entrepreneur, the manager, and the technician. The entrepreneur is the innovator, thinks about strategy, creates new methods to penetrate or create entirely new markets. The entrepreneur lives in the future, can't really be bothered with the day-to-day operations of the business, but is more about ideas and about things that are going to happen or that might happen in your business. The manager, on the other hand, is the part of the business that lives in the past. The entrepreneur likes to have control over what's going to happen. The manager wants order in the systems that exist in the business. The entrepreneur lives in the future. The manager lives in the past. The technician lives in the present. The technician loves the feel of things and the fact that things get done. He doesn't want to be concerned with anything else but working on the current state of the company, doesn't think about the future, doesn't think about what happened in the past and how we can improve the process. It's purely about the technicalities of running the business day to day and staying in the present. And one of the biggest issues is when you start a business that you are probably mostly one of these three persons. In my case, I'm a very technical person, so you have a tendency to think that the product is the business. And it kind of makes sense, without a product you don't have a business. But it's not true. The business is the system that you design, and the product is just part of that system. And I've also seen the other way around, like marketing people that don't understand that you need a product in order to sell things, for example. So they view software development purely as a cost. It is a cost, but you also need it to grow a business. If you want to create something, you might have an idea like, hey, I want to create a cool tool that fixes this issue that's built on this technology that I'm really interested in. But that's actually the wrong place to start. And you also need to think about whether you're doing it in order to learn about a new tool, which is perfectly fine, or whether you're doing it to really solve a problem for people. And if you want to create a business, you definitely should start with what problem are you solving for somebody? How are you helping somebody? And this is also true for this YouTube channel, actually. I mean, I could have started the channel just creating videos about stuff that I find interesting, but that's not my goal. My goal is to help you. So I should find topics that you find interesting and that are helpful to you. And that's a very subtle shift in mindset and how you run businesses, how you are creating things. But it makes a huge difference. The final book that I want to talk about, and this is also a book I read physically, not on my Kindle. It's called Bad Blood, and it's about the story of Elizabeth Holmes, written by John Carreyrou. And this book is really interesting to me. To me, this book is about integrity. We all like to have integrity. We all like to be a person that is being viewed as having integrity. But the scary thing to me that this book shows is how far you can actually go without having integrity. Of course, in the end, everything went wrong, but this story is just one data point. I mean, there's probably many other companies where integrity is not to be found and they actually get away with it. What this book also stresses to me is that Silicon Valley is not the only place in the world where you can be software development. Sure, you probably make more money there, but it also comes with the price of very high living costs and often a workaholic lifestyle. Personally, I'm not really attracted to working at one of the big tech companies, and I think that's okay. I want to live a calm life, a happy life. I want to spend time with my family, with my kids. I want to do things that I love, be creative. I really love working on this YouTube content and my online course, and I think it's just a great opportunity that I think I would never have had if I would just have aimed for working at one of the big tech companies. So, Bad Blood. I really highly recommend that you read this. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a like. Consider subscribing to my channel if you want to learn more about software development and design. Thanks for watching, take care, and see you soon.